So, hi everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the Brankas Masterclass. I am your host, Chava Nugid. For those who are new here, let me introduce first what our Masterclass series is all about. As the leading open bank provider in Southeast Asia, part of the mission of Brankas is to include being able to share our experiences and our knowledge to the tech community in the hopes that these will also help them in their own projects and startups. In the past, we've touched on open banking APIs and infrastructure as well as building API products. Tonight, we will have one of our own show us how to leverage design to bring your product from vision to reality. After the presentation, we will be opening up our question and answer portion. During the talk, you can already post your questions on the Q&A box. It's that icon on the bottom of your screen. So just click on that and post your questions anytime so that we can run through them later. All right? So let's go on ahead and introduce our speaker for tonight. So we will have Marco Palinar. He is our Brankas Pay product manager and resident UI UX guy. He took up a BA in social sciences, majoring in psychology and political science. But he gained an interest in graphic design during his later college years. His first stint in UX and UI design was at Friendster, a pioneering social networking site. Through this, he slowly got deeper into the world of UX and UI design, eventually landing side jobs from colleagues and startups. After a year at Friendster, he decided to work independently as a consultant, and after 11 years of doing so, he joined Brankas as employee number 3 because of his desire to build a product that could impact people's lives. Currently, Marco is the product manager for Brankas Pay, which is our new product that was born out of a need for more avenues for digital payments, especially for micro and small online businesses. So today, he will be talking about how he was able to bring pay from a vision to reality, delving into the various aspects of excellent design. So with that, let me turn over the room to Marco.
Hey, hi guys. Good evening. Thank you everyone for basically taking some time out of your day and attending our masterclass. Really grateful for everyone here. Okay, so quick sanity check. Let me just share my screen, and hopefully you should be able to see what I am seeing. Does everyone see that? Charo, can you see my screen?
Yep, we're good.
All right, awesome. All right, so let's thank you, Shara, for introducing me. I guess just a little bit additional background. Along along with being one of the product managers of Pay, I am also heading Brankas, our internal design UX UI design team in Brankas. So, and you'll find out later why that is. It's kind of like configured that way, and it's also part of like how we basically bias to sort of like making one of our products, which is Pay, that will be kind of like center to the discussion today, making it made it how we made it real essentially, right? So, all right, let's. So today I'll be talking about making it real, how we can get your products from concept to customers, and especially taking a look at the role that design plays towards basically bootstrapping a product from raw ideas into actually something that's out there and being used by people. All right. So first, some boundaries, I guess, because obviously we only have an hour. I have an hour, and hopefully my kids don't wake up in the middle of this talk, but I think we're covered there. But we have 1 hour. There's a lot to talk about, and basically we just want to be able to get the most out of our time together. So there will be things that will seem that are very connected to more product management, product development than design, and that is I guess intended because we will be talking about design in the context of launching a product and how people can leverage that. So there will be concepts here. I usually in the beginning and interspersed in between, talking about how to constrain your ideas, how to build bound, how to basically organize the solutions, find the personas that you're building for, which are obviously product development, product management concepts, but very much needed um, for designers to be able to you know design something and not waste their energy designing something that won't be out there in the real world. So that's just kind of like how I'm going to frame this. And in particular, we will be talking about Brankas Pay and our experience internally in how we've conceptualized it, came up with a solution, validated the problem, and basically took it from from our thoughts and our concepts to the actual real world, and started getting customers for it. All right. So without further ado, all right. So let me start with sort of like a kind of like a statement, right? That is somewhat true nowadays. A lot of people, especially people who've been in tech a long time, kind of like are starting to feel this, right? Not, and this feels more true now in 2020 than it was maybe when I started in tech, maybe in 2006, right? It seems like creating a modern product is hard, right? What does that mean, right? It means like there's so much uh, tools out there. It seems like there is always a process to be learned, a process to be applied. It seems like there's always a new framework to be applied whenever you need to start a product, right? And it can be overwhelming. And in fact, it's for most people starting up, and actually even veterans in the field, just like me, like been doing this 13 years, and like looking back at how we're doing things nowadays, it seems like it's very, very overwhelming, right? Now, um, obviously, this becomes a barrier to a lot of people, that have ideas that they want to get out there, or product ideas that they want to sort of try, because just basically, trying to figure out what design, just what design software they're going to use. There's a multitude out there. Obviously, each one has their own pros and cons. How are they going to sort of like um, develop the front end for it? What backend are they going to use? Right? It's very, very daunting for people starting out, and even in our case, we're inside an actual or an established company. It's also very daunting because there are lots of processes that basically, sometimes instead of facilitating you getting something out there or making something real, um, basically gates you, right? It becomes a sort of like a more of a barrier rather than something that uh, um, yeah, basically assists you getting something in the real world. So biasing towards making it real, what does this really mean? So there are many ways to skin a cat, right? But the key here is basically to pick one, or you only need one way to skin a cat, right? So um, and basically what we've learned developing Pay was that we had so many options to us, so many um, solutions out there, and ways to approach the problem. But we found out that all we needed to do basically was just take that first step, and start with square one, whatever that is, right? It could be um, whatever that is for your product, right? So this is what we found that helps take a product and make it real, right? So number one, clarity. So you need clarity on the problems you're solving, and the solutions to be delivered, and who you're solving the problems for, right? So without this kind of clarity, um, again, it's hard to kind of like hold the the concept of product in your head. And what tends to happen is that you're thinking more of the bigger picture rather than step one, or rather than what is that first version of the product, like for the lack of a better term, the MVP, or your version one of the product that you need to get out in the real world first. So a lot of people get so in love and enamored, and I can't blame them. It is very, it is very, how do you put this? very attractive to start thinking about high level goals, right, and high level problems that you want to solve. But like for example, us when we started Pay, um, initially I was thinking that oh, this is going to be the next way we're going to do payments. This is the next generation. But um, fortunately, like the team kind of like reined me in, and start basically put um, basically just discarded that rose-colored lens, and essentially basically uh, get me down on the ground so that I can understand essentially what needs to be done first, so that we can get payout and rolling, right? The second thing that is essential, we found, is having constraints. So the funny thing is, yeah, so constraints is basically what are not what we're not building, right, or what are we not spending resources on. So this is basically just being disciplined and sort of like saying, okay, this product is not going to be. So for Pay, I'll give you a quick example. We decided specifically that Pay is not going to be like a Magento or the next e-commerce platform, right? We're not going to build a CRM. We're not going to build a component that manages what do you call this, reconciliation for our clients. That's not what we intended it to be. And by doing that, it clearly defines um, what you're going to build, and also in terms of resources, it, it it quickly paints a picture of how much you will be spending in terms of time, in terms of developer resource, or like what you need to make to get this product shipped out, basically, right? And then last is goals. So clarity constraints gets you so far, right? Now you have a clear picture of who you're developing the product for, what it's solving, what you're actually building, right? How much resources it takes. But without goals, basically you're in danger of spinning your wheels forever in any particular stage of the build. So goals were was very having goals were was is very key was very key to us in basically making sure that we don't spend too much time in any specific stage of building the product. So for example, in the design stage or the development stage, like we had a specific goal to tell us when things were good enough that okay, we can roll this out and see what happens for now, right? So I guess before we go in depth into sort of like what we designed, how we went about it, let I guess it has value basically to sort of like tell you guys the story of Pay and the tale of how we built a fourth product in our spare time inside Brankas, right? So that's the reason why I'm kind of like earlier I mentioned that I am also my real work in Brankas is actually leading the design team, and um, being one of the product managers of Bay came about sort of because this is something that we decided we would do in our spare time, whenever we could find spare time, working with working on our other responsibilities inside the company. So obviously, as everyone knows, COVID-19 happened, right? And one effect of that is basically countries have started locking down most of their major cities, to curb the infection. Now, a side effect of that was that people obviously not being able to go to stores or to shop and get their daily necessities, started finding ways to barter or sell and buy online, right? So in the Philippines, particularly, I noticed, and I'm not sure, not the only one. A lot of people noticed. Basically, there was a trend of informal merchants, small and micro merchants, selling their wares on Facebook. At least in the Philippines, it's on majority on Facebook. And the way it would happen is that obviously they would post their wares on maybe their Facebook page or on Marketplace. People would inquire. They would send their bank details so that people can pay them and people will make deposits, right? So that's what I do. That's sort of like how things went as the world tried to figure its way out of COVID. Now, what we saw, me and a couple of I guess people inside Brancas, that while like so essentially before COVID, it was hard to get, you know, people in the region, particularly people in the Philippines, to transact online, right? To trust online um, uh, ways of paying people, right? So whether it's online bank transfer or, you know, using e-wallets like Gcash, Paymaya. However, because of COVID-19, that kind of like accelerated the adoption of these sort of these different ways of paying online, right? Now, the main I guess the main problem that we saw still was that it basically there was no single way to capture, um, basically capture these payments, right? It's like it's either different banks have their different online banking apps, and people would basically buy stores. Okay, if I had BDO, then I'll just send my BDO number, right? And people would pay through their own other, you know, whatever banking app they're using. If they use e-wallets, then it's each e-wallet to its own, right? So there was no unified experience in terms of merchants having to collect their payments. They would also need to send um, sensitive information such as bank information, right, directly to people that they may or may not know, or they may or may not be familiar with. And it was it was something that we saw that we could solve essentially, and people were looking for a much better way to kind of like invoice their clients or invoice their customers, and also, you know, be able to track payments, right? So that's what got us intrigued about the situation and started the story of Pay. So we came up with Pay to solve the problem of small and micro merchants basically being able to send payable invoices, and receive payment through online bank transfers, right? Regardless of which bank you have, and regardless of which bank your customers have. So we had to start out with something, right? Because obviously there's a million different ways of delivering this, and internally we have a process called the pitch. It's not ours. I borrowed this from Basecamp, but we modified it to some certain degree, um, to suit our internal processes. But for what it is, it could be called something else in your company, or you could use a similar methodology. But what really the pitch is, it's just basically an internal validation process, right? To quickly define a product that you're building. So whatever it is, you can call it pitch, you can call it, just def- uh, just scoping the product, right? But there are key aspects to the pitch that were useful to us, right? So number one, the pitch needed to have a clear statement of the problem. So meaning state the problem that you're trying to solve in a clear um, manner, right? Um, and number two is state who you're solving it for. So state basically who are we who which well what people are we solving the problem for, right? Is it, so in our case, would it be, you know, enterprise merchants? Would it be like the department stores that have shut down because of COVID, right? Or is it like the small and micro merchants? So like there are lots to choose from, but basically you need to specify who you're solving the specific problem for, and then setting clear boundaries as to what we're not, again, what we're not trying to build, and identifying the knowns and the unknowns. So basically, you know, now you know the problem, now you know who you're solving it for, but what are you not building, basically, right? So what we're not building. So for and also identifying knowns and unknowns. So knowns and unknowns meaning that, okay, we know that people bias towards bank transfers because credit cards are not, um, there's very very low adoption of credit cards in this region and in the Philippines especially, right? What we didn't know was, if which banks people actually, at least we didn't know at the time, right? Which banks people mostly transacted with. Would it be BPI? Would it be BDO? Would it be Union Bank? Right? So there are different things that we knew and didn't know, but having that in the pitch kind of like paints at least a picture of like what we can address now and what we can postpone for later to fix or address. And then last is setting a time frame to deliver your pilot or MVP. So obviously, um, in our case, because we are also doing this in our spare time, we had to set a time frame, a realistic time frame when we can deliver pay to to the world. Otherwise, we'd be spinning our wheels forever, right? So the pitch for pay, right? So who what was the problem, right? So the problem is that online payments during this time of COVID-19 is a mess, right? So that's just like I said earlier. People have more than one way of like sending and receiving bank transfers as payment. There is no unified way, and so the experience per customer and per merchant is vastly different. um, and yeah, essentially it's just not conducive to a sort of like a repeatable process. If you obviously, if you're a business, you want this, you'd want being able to accept payment and also get paid as a more repeatable process, right? And then who are we solving this for? So we've clearly identified that as we are solving this for micro and small merchants, right? And sort of like the constraints or the boundaries. So we definitely were not building a payment gateway. We were only using bank transfers as a mode of payment for pay. And actually, so for the first launch of the product, we only biased towards BDO and BPI as being the two big banks basically, that we knew could do bank transfers, right? And then obviously we needed to validate the idea first, right? So the initial goal was to at least get 10 signups for our kind of like private beta. So so if you look at the pitch for pay, this actually kind of like paints a clear picture of, um, as a designer, what I could design, right? It's clear that I'm not designing a payment gateway. It's for micro and small merchants, and it's a tool to basically facilitate uh, receiving online bank transfers as payments, right? So they're the with just with sort of like the pitch, it was starting to become clear as a designer. It's kind of like, okay, I think I know kind of like a rough idea what to design, and how to approach the problem of designing a product for uh, that will serve as pay basically, right? So just to give you guys, if you guys, obviously not everyone is familiar with pay. It's also just regional for now in the Philippines. Just to give you guys an idea of what pay is. Here's our kind of like flow video for pay. It's actually a screen capture of pay in the real world. So as we like we said, like pay is a super simple bank transfer payment for online micro and small merchants, right? So what we've created basically is a way to create a one-time invoice or an online invoice, right? That accepts the price, the items, items or service details. So for example, 2 boxes of cupcakes or whatnot. And sorry, my bad. I shouldn't have pressed space. Additional remarks for the merchant, just maybe where they're going to deliver. And when they click create invoice, what it does, it creates a invoice link that they can copy and paste to any of the popular messenger services that they're using to transact with their customers, right? So that's one constraint already that we've identified and decided we're not creating. So we're not creating a direct integration with a messenger app. We're offloading the sending of the link of the invoice link through the merchant itself. So by identifying that, we've the and as a designer, I already know that, okay, the only interface that I really need for pay is just a way to create an invoice and generate an invoice, right? And what do I need essentially to be able to create that invoice? I just need the price, the item, maybe remarks, right? Actually, remarks was actually we weren't even sure if we wanted to put that, but it doesn't hurt to put an additional field, such as remarks anyway. So we decided that this was kind of like bare minimum. This is what the interface needed to contain. So clicking on copy invoice link, um, they can basically go to their messenger, right? Message their customer and send it out. When the customer clicks on that link, now they can go to our IDP, which is our kind of like identity portal for them to be able to log in to uh, to the banks that they want to transact with. So, for example, BDO in this use case, right? And then log into their bank account. It logs in, and then they we they enter their OTP. For BDO, you need an OTP to log in. We'll list all the accounts that are supported, um, so you can see there, so that they can actually choose which accounts they will select or pay from, right? Um, so here it's just only one account. So they click transfer, and then they will be asked for one more OTP to authorize the transfer, right? And then yeah, then basically that's it. Um, the the funds are received directly by the merchant, and this invoice page actually serves as a what do you call this, a permanent record of the transaction. So if they visit that link again and the transaction has been paid or is successful, it will reflect that the status of that payment, right? So that was kind of the rules that we've set for pay. This is how we've built it now. So obviously, that's a lot to kind of like, that was the full product already as it stands right now. Actually, that there's more there are more features now, but what like the the key thing to figure out obviously when you were starting is like, okay, what are we supposed to design and where do we start, right? So if you remember sort of like the pitch, right, that we basically had a goal there. The initial goal was kind of like to first validate the idea of pay, right? Is this something that merchants, small, micro, are actually going to be interested in? Having an invoicing tool that actually that they can actually use to generate links that can facilitate bank transfer payments from their customers, right? So the first thing that we designed was actually um, a landing page more than the the actual app itself. So what we did was we created this landing page. We designed it really quick. It's really not fancy. We used a lot of we biased towards reusing a lot of what was already there in our existing in our other products existing pages, and just created one for pay, right? What the goal here was just to communicate that idea, that product idea, right? You're a merchant, you use bank transfers as payments. We have a tool for you where you can sign up, link your your destination bank account or the bank account you use, and you can start creating invoices that you can send through any of your messenger apps, right? And we posted this on Facebook, I think, and a bunch of like, so it's also popular here in the Philippines where we have a lot of like Telegram and Viber groups that are kind of like marketplaces, for the lack of a better term. So we've also posted it there, and the target was to get 10 signups, right? So I think within that first week we got probably around close to 20, and by the end of like we gave it a 2 week run. By the end of the second week, I think we were like a little over 30 signups. So that clearly met our goal, right? And meant that okay, we need to start creating pay, right? Making it real, right? So okay, so next so that became another problem for design, right? So what would we design next, right? So referring back to the pitch, right? Um, we needed to create a tool that essentially can get the details of whatever the merchant is charging for, package it up as an invoice that they can send out in a link, right? So clear, it was very clear from the start that the only this is actually pay. If we distill pay sort of like as a single page, this would actually be it. It's this one-time invoice page, right? So all we needed essentially was just the price. We needed the customer name, obviously, so that they know that what they're paying for is actually meant for them. Just to minimize the impact of maybe sending the wrong link to a different customer, right? And then the item details so that they know what they're paying for. And then just additional remarks, right? um, and then yeah, and then that's essentially it, right? Behind the scenes, all the backend what needed to do is just basically generate an invoice, send it to our IDP basically, um, which was already part of our direct product, and the IDP would handle the actual bank transfer process, logging them in, getting their OTPs, and basically facilitating until the transfer is actually successful. Now, as you can see here, when we mocked it up, there were also sort of like the transaction history and the create pay button. These were things that we kind of like uh, thought I mean we knew we would need this at some point in time, and we designed them. But when we came out with the first version just to present to our merchants, it was only actually this page, right? So the transaction history really was only it was basically a just a collection. There's a table that collected all the different payments that had been made through the pay product, and and indicate their different status, the amount, when they were created, when they were paid, and their invoice ID, right? So it was really just for us to be able to sort of like have some sort of uh, running index of the transactions, and it was very simple. We didn't really have to overthink this. It was clear that it would just be a table, and in fact, um, some of these details were not part of it. Like for example, I don't think during our first iteration we didn't have the details as part of it. Just they created, they paid. We just added this later on. But the point is, we just needed something to display all the transactions, and the simplest way to to this to have designed it is basically just use a table, right? So that's what it was. And like I said earlier, we didn't even launch with this, right? So what we did not build, or what we built later, right? So we did not build. So like modern uh, application, like development would impose, not impose, but basically suggest that you need to build blank slates. What do you need to build? You need to build alerts, error states, notifications. But if you're actually biasing towards just getting it out there, a lot of these, especially if you're not using any sort of like frameworks, are very very tedious to sort of like map out and build, right? Um, and we needed just to sort of like validate that there's a use case for this. So we actually intentionally not build a lot of these things. So we didn't build any blank slates. Meaning blank slates also, just to those who are not who don't know, the blank slates are basically what you see when you first enter an application and there's nothing on it, right? We didn't intend to build that, right? We just provided them with a form. We didn't build the transaction history at once, although we already designed it, right? We did not, like I said earlier, we did not build any integration to Messenger app, so we did not plan to sort of like have a chatbot or anything. We did not design anything to that effect. Again, there are no notification alert systems that we planned for this, and even actually, we did not intentionally we did not create a sign up system, right? So because what we had people do was sign up through a sort of like a mailing list, if that makes sense, right? As part of that landing page, we collected all their emails. What we just did was we just reached out individually, manually, to each of the merchants, maybe 5 merchants at a time or 10 merchants at a time, and sent them all direct links to create their account. And this was basically just so that we did not have to worry about having to develop or hook up to our, because in Brankas we do have like our own like single sign-on service, just so that we wouldn't have to worry about having to work around or work with that, right? Because that would take another week, which we did not have because we were working on pay part time, right? It was a conscious decision by the group to basically, all right, we'll just send them invite links manually and have them sign up and create their accounts, right? Even in fact, even some of the merchants, we actually just created their accounts manually, straight into the back end. But the whole purpose of that really is so that we don't get bogged down with the processes so much, and focusing on getting the product perfect or right at any given stage, and just get some form of it out there, warts and all, so that we can actually have users transacting on it. Because we knew that we would never get it perfect, so better to get it out now, and capitalize on the phenomenon that is people getting more comfortable with online payments early on, rather than build it behind the scenes for maybe 2-3 months, and then come up with a much more polished product. But obviously we might have missed the boat at that point, right? So obviously the first version is not the last version that we'd basically be creating, right? And um, yeah, we had future features that we planned, but we didn't know basically if, number one, when would we build these? Number two, should we actually build these features, right? Is it something that they actually want, or is it just something in our head, right? So one of these sample features is basically this concept of a pay button, right? So the pay button is, what we were thinking about it is basically for merchants that had some sort of like, they had their own website, or they had their own landing page, or maybe um, Shopify account that they're using manual payments for, because obviously Shopify doesn't support local bank transfers. There would be this pay button would be a way to, um, what do you call this, inject pay into their into their landing page, website, e-commerce site, whatnot, right? So the way we did it was we actually, um, kind of like hid it in plain sight, to kind of surface the idea to the merchants that, okay, there's something coming soon. Give them some idea of what how it would look like, and essentially just give them the message of what it does, right? So it says here, with the pay button, you can easily add a one-click checkout feature to your e-commerce store or website. Pretty clear, right? Um, and the what happened basically was that we had actual merchants that, that were bigger, that started inquiring about this pay button, even if you haven't built it out. And so that served as basically a validation. This basically sort of like, we were able to design something, that was not necessarily implemented just yet, and be able to put it in front of actual customers to be able to see, you know, if they would, if it's something they would actually use, and validated the idea, right? Um, and it's a good way for you also to sort of like, if you have, uh, if you're constrained with resources, developers, or, for example, like us, definitely, because we were doing it at our spare in our spare time, even with the developers that we had on board the pay project, the pay product, we're also working at the spare time. We only had a very finite development window for all these features, and so, having to validate these future features is actually a good way for us to schedule things, develop in terms of like development, right? Now, how about feedback and iteration? Obviously, similar to future features, the existing features that we ship with, obviously, they wouldn't stay like that for long. Number one, because there are different, when you get it in the hands of people, they might use it a different way, or there's things that you might have not considered. Even, during pitching, and even if when you validated that idea already, that might not hold true once you launch, right? So the convention obviously would be, you would need to set up some sort of elaborate, feedback process, right? Maybe do a focus, not exactly focus group, but maybe do A/B testing, or maybe set up some sort of like a preference testing and whatnot, and create, um, a lot of like formal processes around feedback and iteration. But the reality of what we realized is that, with something like pay that you've just launched, and you're if you're biasing towards making it real, getting close to the metal is actually very, very valuable, right? So what does getting close to the metal means? It's asking customers directly, because and especially for us, with the way we've onboarded the customers, meaning that we were actually communicating with them. We had their email addresses. They've reached out to us directly to ask to be onboarded to pay. We actually, reached out to them and asked them, directly questions regarding, feedback about, how they find the product, which features, do they want next, what features do they find particularly useful, what features do they won't they find particularly useful, right? And the thing about this is also, you can weigh your resources when iterating because of this, right? So meaning that, um, if you don't have development time right now, and there are a bunch of like changes that need to be done um, to the app based on direct feedback from customers, um, because it's you and the customers talking, and you also and the team kind of like working on this, you know, um, basically when you can deliver specific resources, sorry, specific features, and you can actually prioritize the features accordingly. Um, and also, so one thing that we also realize is that the first version does not need to be the last. So meaning that, it might be painful for the users now because there's a first version that is obviously working but not working, optimally, or there are things that needs to be changed. But as long as you're iterating and you keep communicating with your customers, it's not, it's not a death sentence for the product, basically. But key here is getting close to the metal, and instead of having to worry about setting up some elaborate UX process, at least at this stage, right, at this stage where you've launched a small pilot or a small MVP, it's on you to actually go to the customers and get their feedback. So one of the things that we've kind of like iterated the product, based on, that direct feedback that we've gotten from customers, is that we've realized that a lot of these merchants have multiple bank accounts. So for several reasons, um, one is to avoid fees that that their customers incur because of interbank transfer. So that's transferring from bank A to bank B, right? So meaning that what they would do is they would have a BPI account and they would also have a BDO account. But because of our, because we were biasing towards launching the product, we only intended for them to basically onboard one bank as a merchant, right? So what we've done, as an iteration to that, is we've allowed them to add multiple accounts. So supporting multiple accounts, and per invoice that they create, they can now actively select which destination account their customer would be paying into. So for example, I know that my customer is paying from a BPI account, and I don't want him to incur any extra charges. I have a BPI account as well as a BDO account. For this invoice that I am generating, I can actually actively select BPI for them to use, basically, so that they don't incur any fees. The other reason that we found for them to have multiple accounts is some merchants use it as a way to reconcile. So meaning that they actually ask specific customers to pay into a specific bank account, because when they're reconciling and when they're sort of like doing their books, it makes much more sense for them to find the money in a specific account rather than have to sort of like make sense out of all the money in a single bank account, right? One other thing that came out of this sort of like iteration, direct feedback from users that we iterated on, is that, so initially, like you saw in that video, the product went directly to the IDP, or our identity portal. Um, the problem was that one basically the identity portal, because it was not built for pay initially, it was built for our direct bank transfer API. It did not have the capability to display invoice the invoice sorry the invoice details. So meaning they wouldn't be able to see their customer name if the invoice was for them. They wouldn't even be able to see who is requesting for their payment. The customers wouldn't be able to see the merchant's name, and things like items and remarks, right? So that was a problem, right? So what we saw, what we came up with was to have an interim step prior to them going to the IDP, which is this sort of like this invoice summary, which is just essentially just a simple page, right? But it contains all the pertinent details that a customer would need in order for them to proceed, right? Because what would end up happening is that once they click on the link and they get directed to the IDP, which the first step of which is like the bank selector, most of their customers got scared away already because they just didn't understand what was going on, right? And so this invoice page was designed basically to um, kind of like ease them into the process of, okay, you're paying for this invoice because you've ordered, um, 1 dozen cupcakes from Awesome Cupcakes, right? And and this invoice page also allowed us to be able to um, surface messages to the customer. So and this was particularly useful because, as we know, in the Philippines, not all the banks here are like reliable 100% of the time. So during intermittent periods where banks would go offline, we would be able to send out a message through this invoice link to all customers, saying that, for example, um, for BDO users, BDO is having connection problems at this moment. Maybe you can try again or something like that. Or like here in this example, for video users, we recommend using in-app OTPs as opposed to SMS OTPs for smoother transactions, right? So it's a way for us to directly, um, make a much more friendlier product for their end customers, right? And one thing that we added basically is, obviously, because Pay is such a new product and people are just learning about Brankas, kind of like, uh, what I guess they call these trust building elements in e-commerce, right? So we found out that obviously if you show them, that you're legit, we're registered with the National Privacy Commission, we are ISO 27001 compliant, which is obviously true. That they understand more that this is an actual legit company rather than some phishing scam, right? That's kind of like what we were trying to solve as well. So yeah, essentially, what I was trying to get here basically was that, there are lots of things, in modern design, modern app design, modern product development that seems like the right way, and I'm sure they have their merits. But when it comes down to it, actually, what we found very valuable is biasing towards getting your product out there rather than worrying about processes, rather than worrying about design systems, icons, and whatnot. It's like being able to constrain yourself to a specific finite solution for a very very specific finite problem for a very very specific finite group of people, actually does a lot of good, and helps you get your product out there, which means that then your product is in the hands of customers, and you can make, you can, number one, you can make an impact obviously with your product, with it being in the hands of customers, and secondly, you can start iterating or steering your product towards, towards where it's supposed to be, right? um, yeah, I think, and so that's basically it for, um, we're almost close. Yeah, I think we have 3 more minutes, but sorry. Thanks guys, thank you for your time. Thanks you. Then yeah.
Okay. Uh, okay. We have two questions here.
Okay, sure.
All right. So, uh, the first question is coming from Jot Mitra.
Okay.
So I hope I said that correctly. He said he's asking, wondering how did you come up with the designs?
So, um so when come okay, there's a lot. I guess it's a very vague question, but I'll try to answer it the best I understand it. So basically the designs came up because of the pitch that we've basically created, right? So we've, based on the problem that we knew we wanted to solve, based on who we were going to solve it for, and based on the constraints, the constraints that we've decided not to do. This is this is not what we're going to build. This is what we're going to build. That's how, kind of like, that's what shaped the design basically. So it was taking into consideration, what we were willing to solve, who we were solving it for, and what we've decided that we're not going to build. Did that answer your question, John? Is that what we did that?
Okay, I guess that was answered. Oh, by the way, again, if you have any questions, again, you will have the Q&A icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just click on that and ask away, okay? So there's another question from Jot, and he's asking, are there any initial research done before starting the project?
So yes, there was initial research done. But it was not any formal research, right? So, hence, kind of like, it was. We were fortunate enough that the problem we were trying to solve was, I would say, showing itself in significant form because of the COVID situation. That we did not, kind of like, we did not need to do any in-depth research. We were seeing it happening in our own, kind of like, circles, right? And I would see it in my friends, I would see it in acquaintances that they're starting to, people I wouldn't normally see buying and selling online. I was now seeing buying and selling online, and it was also, internal validation first came from other members of the team that were seeing the same, pattern as well, right? So it was our CPO seeing the same pattern as well, and our like you know dir- en- um, director for engineering also seeing the same. But obviously that's not enough to sort of like go ahead and spend resources on. Hence why we sort of like came up with the goal of trying to do a pitch first, right? So okay, sort of like define, okay, what are we trying to build or design, and what are we trying to who are we trying to solve it for, right? And then essentially it it was also validated uh, by basically when we launched that landing page and got maybe 30 signups in the span of 2 weeks. That was additional validation that it's a product that we sort of like needed to build, right? So it was not any formal research, so but it was also directly looking at patterns, uh, in our own sort of like personal circles, and validating that basically by surfacing the product idea to you know um, to our intended audience, or our intended in our intended audience, and trying to see if there was any traction right through that landing page. So it was a very very cheap way for us to kind of like see if okay, this is something that we could embark with.
So really, it's just all about, because it's just experiences coming from yourself, or and from your friends and from family, that
Yeah.
that you were able to suddenly come up with maybe
Yes.
this maybe
I
this
mean,
idea.
obviously, it can't be applied to all problems. Like some problems are, you need more formal research because either they're very niche or they're very, in depth and very, it's something that you need to kind of like, the pattern is not more obvious, right? We were very fortunate that, this pattern of online buying and selling and using bank transfers as payments was accelerated by the pandemic, right? And it was very very obvious, I think, like among the members of the team, that okay, we were seeing people in our own personal circles that okay, that were engaging in that behavior basically, right? And having problems with doing online payments with bank transfers.
So you were getting, obviously from this point, you were getting feedback the um, from the users of Pay.
Yeah.
Uh, but the secondary, if I understand, the secondary user there would be the clients of those who use Pay. How
That's
are
true.
you able to um, get feedback from those people when they're not really exactly, you know, on the platform?
Right. So for that, right, we depended a lot on our relationships with the merchant, right? And because we were very, very, we communicated directly with them, we were able to uh, ask them to help us, conduct, ask some questions on their end customers basically, and collect that information. So it was very, very like having that direct connection to the merchants early on because of it, rather than doing some sort of like uh, seeded interview or like random interview or like just a anonymous interview or like or focus group discussion. That having that direct connection basically paid dividends in terms of like we were able to gain access to their customers through them, and yeah, that makes sense,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. So Jot just said, thank you for answering his questions.
Oh, no worries, man.
So there's an anonymous attendee. He's asking, he or she is asking, can you talk a bit about integrating with banks for the pay feature? How difficult is it to convince banks to collaborate with Brankas?
So okay, so it was we were already integrated with banks prior to Pay, meaning that like I was explaining earlier, Pay is essentially that invoicing feature, that basically allow the merchants to generate a link that would redirect their customers to our IDP, which is part of our direct API product. Now, the direct API product is our kind of like integration with banks. Um, so we were fortunate also in the sense that if probably we didn't have that API built out already, we probably wouldn't have the resources to build out Pay. But again, it's like it's being conscious about the resources you also have, that is key to sort of like getting your product real right. Because if like you're trying to solve a really really difficult product a problem, and you have only so much resources to do so, right? Going on a going on a like a Don Quixote quest to kind of like launch a product is going to be very, very difficult. So it was because we saw that we already had a direct bank transfer API that is that we actually already built. All we needed to do was build this invoicing feature for the merchants, right? Basically, that connected to that direct API. And to answer your question, how difficult it is to convince banks to collaborate with Brankas? It depends on the bank, is what I'll say. It depends on the bank.
So do you think that without this, because I would call this something like uh, it had been an advantage that Brancas is in the business of open banking
That's
systems,
correct.
that we were able to, or that Pay was able to be created so fast. Do you think, um, if that advantage was not existing, do you think Pay would still be able to be created?
It's hard to say, right? Obviously, it depends on the appetite of the company, right? If Here's what I would say: if we had the same kind of like resources available to us, meaning that we would need to work part time, like us already existing team members in Pay, um, and we're not able to get any additional resources to work on Pay, and assuming that we didn't have that direct API, so meaning we would have to build that out. Probably not, right? Looking at that, if we were at the pitch, we were at the pitch level. It's obviously something that we would assess the resources available to us. It would probably be not we won't build it, but not now, right? Until we until we could get additional resources, most likely. But I mean, that's the thing, right? That's the thing with also kind of like vetting these uh, vetting your product early on is you need to be very honest with yourself about can you actually deliver, right? Or will you just drown trying to trying to swim to the deep sea, right? If that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Again, if you have any questions, please do post them on our Q&A. So for now, we have one more question here from Johnny Estilias.
Hey, Johnny.
Hi, Johnny. So, great talk. You mentioned COVID triggered the acceleration of the design, development, deployment of this product. So, how difficult was it to take it from design to production in such a short amount of time?
That's a great question, Johnny. To be honest, it wasn't that difficult because we cut a lot of unnecessary stuff, right? Because we biased towards we wanted this out, right? That was the goal. By any means possible, we wanted the product out. Um, and so we, like I said earlier, we didn't even build a sign up system just so that it's not something that we need to worry about developing or having to worry about integrating to our single sign on system, right? It was what if they want an account, we'll send them a link, they can sign up directly, or we'll create their account, right? So it wasn't really hard accelerating the design and getting the product out. What was hard, I said, well, not exactly hard, but challenging was continuously finding the resources internally to keep iterating on the product, right? It's still a challenge, right? Um, and yeah, it's something that I guess we're still getting better at in terms of internal processes. You know how we would uh, support Pay better, even with the limited resources. But as far as spearhead, as far as kickstarting, as long as everything is clear, like I said, you're clear about the problem that you're solving. You're clear about who you're solving it for. You're clear about what you're not building, right? It was pretty much I wouldn't say easy, but it wasn't hard.
Okay.
Any other
So,
questions?
looks like there are no more questions. Okay. Any last words, Marco?
Um, well, if you haven't checked out Pay, please check it out. If you guys are looking for a way to use bank, you're in the Philippines. maybe you have a side hustle where you accept bank transfers as payments, please check out Pave. That another, I guess other than that, we're hiring. Brankas is hiring, so just go to brank.as/careers. Let me see if I can. Yeah, Brankas/careers. We have a bunch of openings. So yeah, if you're a developer, yeah, we're looking for a bunch of good folks to join our team. So yeah, I think that's it.
Again, for those of you who are still here, if you want to join us, like Marco has said, check out brank.us slash careers. And if you want to check out pay, okay, it will be almost the same link, brankas slash pay. And the onboarding process is pretty simple, really. And that's it then. So again, thank you so much, Marco. And
Thanks for those questions. Thanks,
we'd
Charo.
also like to thank everyone who participated and watched this webinar. Uh, Please tune in or please follow us on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And we're actually also on Instagram, surprisingly. And hopefully follow us there on Facebook, on Instagram, and on IG, so that you could also be updated on our future master classes here on Brankas. And with that, thank you. Have a good night. Good night, Marco. Okay, and
Night,
good night, everyone.
night, everyone. Bye.